Hello void and all who inhabit it, it's me. And literacy is not a one-time skill. It's a muscle that requires continuous exercise. In recent years, there's been a lot of chatter about the loss of media literacy, but you have to possess something in order to lose it. And it occurred to me that maybe folks have never really sat or been encouraged to sit with the media they are consuming and consider its value beyond entertainment. Also, when people utilize media literacy, TM, in social media discussions about audiences struggling to understand the point of a story, what they're describing feels more aligned with reading comprehension, a step away from questioning the production of a text and instead asking, did you understand its meaning? So today I want to spend some time untangling literacy and comprehension, because I think when we're talking about film and TV in particular, it's important to reflect not just on how both literacy and comprehension have really atrophied for the general public, but also the differences between the two and the ways to strengthen your own skill set to become a stronger critical thinker. Let's get started. Reading comprehension is the ability to understand, interpret, and gain meaning from a text. A starting block activity to building comprehension is often to have students summarize a piece of media after completing it. It sounds simple, but if you're distracted when consuming a story, you might struggle to do this. At the end or halfway or even chapter by chapter, you can stop and ask yourself what happened. You might be surprised that despite recognizing the words on a page, you don't actually know. That being said, there's a bunch of different strategies and development plans for cultivating reading comprehension, but I want to most borrow from Scarborough's reading rope. Scarborough's reading rope is a development framework that looks at 8 different skills divided into 2 sections: word recognition and language comprehension. Cultivating a skilled reader requires the support and development of all 8 skills. When we're talking about media literacy, TM, with regards to visual media, 2 skills under the language comprehension section translate pretty directly. The first is literacy knowledge. This is, at its base, the foundational mechanics of how to read, but expands further into understanding the function and frameworks of genres. Literacy knowledge with regards to visual media might translate to understanding that images on the screen carry meaning. There's a point to this collection of images even if we don't know what it is yet. Recognizing the conventions of the genre you're interacting with also translates pretty directly to visual media. A lot of behaviors in rom-coms, for example, if put in horror movies, take on a completely different energy, even if the behavior remains the same, because the genre is different. And we grow to be aware of this even if we aren't consciously naming it as we're watching the film. Weaker literacy knowledge skills might look like misunderstanding the piece of media that you're looking at, or taking it at face value without factoring in the genre. As a recent example, we can look to the reactions to Jennette McCurdy's new book, Half His Age. A lot of people perceived this novel as a romance instead of a book engaging in social commentary. I see a certain type of image, I make an assumption of the genre based on my literacy knowledge of what those types of images mean to me, and move accordingly. I think part of this particular reaction was also fueled by a lack of background knowledge, which is another skill on the rope. But moving on, the second skill I want to focus on and connect to visual media is verbal reasoning. This is the ability to separate literal meaning from figurative and to make inferences. If I tell you that A equals B and B equals C, you can figure out that A equals C. Our media equivalent we will refer to as visual reasoning. Separating literal from figurative meaning can translate pretty directly into our understanding of dialogue, but there's also your ability to understand the difference between what is happening to characters and what is there for your understanding as the audience. Understanding things like voiceovers, dream sequences, elements that, again, even if we can't or don't consciously name them, we're aware that this is here for my understanding and not necessarily something that the character is doing. There's not a voice playing in the sky, and I mean, unless you're watching Bruce Almighty, during a voiceover, for example. This visual reasoning also kind of bleeds into the depiction is not endorsement conversation of understanding the use of images as opposed to believing them to be a direct presentation of something that we should accept or believe or participate in. When it comes to inference, I think we see this via elements like a scene fading to black to suggest a sex scene, or seeing 2 images smashed together that are unrelated but we can decipher decipher meaning. This is known as the Kuleshov effect, but as an example, if I were to show you a woman, then a bakery window, then that woman again, now smiling, you could infer some meaning about how this woman feels about that bakery window, even without anything explicitly being told to you. When folks comment about failing media literacy TM rates, I think this state of comprehension is one of the most damaged and most referred to. A lot of people cannot transitive property their asses through a conversation anymore. Meaning must be told directly, or it will be assumed by whatever two words are closest together. And not even then, right? If we return to that woman bakery window example, some people would still be confused. They might ask,
why did we see those two things together? That was pointless. You didn't even tell me the connection I'm supposed to make.
Without recognizing that, yeah, because you're supposed to make it on your own. And I hate to say this, I really do, but it's because you be on that phone. It is. Folks are struggling with comprehension because they aren't engaging with the variety of information models, and the way most of us receive information is through as few words as possible via our phone. There's only so much brevity one can employ before we begin to sacrifice substance, before we begin to sacrifice our ability to connect dots when the string isn't given to us. I do want to take a moment here to note I'm not referring to comprehension skills, particularly conversational comprehension skills when it comes to neurodivergence. I don't think that's what people are talking about when they are discussing the growing rate of people who are unable to reason verbally, visually through a conversation, a book, a TV show, a film, a music video. All that being said, if comprehension covers understanding, what is media literacy actually? Project Look Sharp, a media literacy initiative based at Ithaca College, describes media literacy as the ability to access, analyze, evaluate, create, and act with respect to media, and with an emphasis on inquiry and reflection. Asking questions about messages and our responses to them is central to media literacy, as is reflecting on the media we create ourselves. Media literacy refers to examining the construction and consumption of a piece of media in a way that requires comprehension. Also, similarly to reading comprehension, there are many frameworks you can use to better understand specifically articles, both scholarly and news-based, but truly any piece of media from a media literacy point of view. Project Look Sharp has a 9-category framework for decoding media that I'll be using for our purposes today, but I've also heard of the RADAR framework. NAMLA, the National Association for Media Literacy Education, an organization with a bevy of free resources, places basic concepts and practices of media literacy within 3 categories. There's also the basic 5 W's as a starting point if you don't feel like looking up any special framework. Regardless of what you pick, the gist is building the ability to reflect on the choices made in the creation of a piece of media that then impact its message, as well as examining your own interpretation. Lackluster media literacy skills leads to a lot of misinformation and disinformation because folks don't check their sources. But when it comes to fictional media, the interpretation part is where shit gets spooky. Using Project Look Sharp's framework, there are 3 categories in particular that suffer in conversations regarding pop culture media literacy. The first 2 work together, conflating content with interpretation. You don't have to agree with a film, for example. You don't have to think it made its argument well in order to identify the message being conveyed. However, there's often a thought process that how something was interpreted is the same as what the piece is trying to say. A common conversation that popped up when The Substance had been released was that the film was misogynistic because viewers had picked up the message of women being objectified. These same viewers, however, didn't factor in that the film was commenting on that dynamic and instead moved forward with their interpretation being the content of the film and thus disliking the film. An aspect to developing strong media literacy is understanding that audiences bring information to the text as well as take information from it. But folks often struggle to separate the point a text, a piece of media, is trying to make from their feelings about it, and again, instead kind of mesh the two together. The third category from Project Look Sharp's framework that I think often factors into pop culture media literacy conversations is context, namely removing context, whether that be external or within the narrative. In pop culture in general, we often see these breaking news conversations that tend to be regurgitation of old information without new context that is being recently discovered by a new wave of people. A part of these conversations will always end up discussing the fact that we've been knew this, why are you just now finding out? But within fictional narratives as well, we can see often people focusing on what they like and ignoring what they don't, to the point at which the narrative itself gets whittled down to something completely different than what the content is actually presenting to viewers. While media literacy can require a more conscious decision to analyze a piece of media, literacy and comprehension continuously work together in our interpretations of fictional text, whether you like it or not. I've given you a few minor examples, but let's look at a case study. Don't run. This will be easy, I promise. I know that when asked to peel back a text for deeper meaning, a lot of folks feel weighed down by the baggage from high school English classes that first introduced the idea of a story being more than just words on a page. In my 9th grade English class, we all laughed when the dog got shot in To Kill a Mockingbird, so I get it. We're not all working with a strong foundation. However, remaining blissfully unconscious in your consumption is a practice that negatively impacts your comprehension. Not only that, this mindset is becoming more strongly celebrated and defended. Enter our case study example of the moment when Hannah Beachler, the production designer for Sinners, asked people their thoughts on a specific frame from the film and was instead met with hostility. This hostility was then countered by people coming to her defense by saying,
"This is the production designer. Obviously, she would know there's deeper meaning here."
But even without knowing who this person was and their role in the production, her question wasn't a ridiculous one to ask. Film and TV are visual mediums created by a team of artists making intentional choices. Visual elements are meant to add to your comprehension of the story, the characters, the themes. Sometimes the curtains, in fact, are not just blue. We can take the frame selected by Beachler and utilize the media literacy practice of questioning technique to activate our reading comprehension skill of inference. Meaning is lost when you remain willfully ignorant, and you run the chance to miss that maybe there is some foreshadowing in the different backgrounds behind the twins, or that more importantly than their accent colors, the difference in fabric and suit construction hints at their personalities before they even say a word. You don't need to break down every single shot of every single movie you watch ever, unless you want to. And yes, you can overshoot a film's message. My favorite example was folks' reaction to Homegirl eating her cereal separate from her milk in Get Out, when Jordan Peele's goal was just to have her do something unsettling. But also, you shouldn't sleepwalk your way through media. You're likely missing a lot and doing yourself a disservice in the process. Media literacy and comprehension skills extend past consumption and reach into the ways that we communicate. You don't have to be actively creating hashtag content to be distributing messages.
Let's just call it what it is, all right? The flirting levels are directly proportional to the literacy levels. That's just what it is. You try to flirt with people and they try to calibrate. What do you mean? What you mean? Everywhere you go. All right. I was talking to this girl the other day. She said she's a traveler. She loves to travel. I said, okay, let me be a flight attendant. She said, but I thought you said you were an artist. I said, what you mean? Catch up, baby girl. I was talking to another girl before, and she said she's religious. I said, show me where to worship at, and I'll do it. And she said, wait, I don't even know what religion you are. I said, whoa.
So if we want to be better communicators and critical thinkers, what are some things we can do, starting with the media we are consuming? Firstly, you have to read, beloved. Literally, you gotta pick up a book, baby. Read out loud, okay? Change the way you are ingesting information. I recommend this all the time. Reading out loud is so helpful at just catching things that maybe you would skim over if you were reading silently to yourself. When you reach a word you don't know, look it up. If there's a reference in a piece of media you don't understand, look that up. Also, because I know the overconsumption demon has reached BookTok/Tube, get a library card and use it. The Libby app is great. You can borrow all types of books there. You can also borrow audiobooks. Audiobooks count as reading. I would highly recommend that you borrow them from your library as opposed to using Spotify or Audible, but hey, that's just me. You can also use a library card to watch films and I think some TV shows on Canopy and I believe Hoopla as well. I recommend watching movies from before the Hays Code if you really want to crack your mind, but watch whatever you want, babe. Just watch something. Gain experience interacting with a variety of stories and storytellers. Ingest media, girl. Engage with stuff. And on top of that, push yourself to focus. I really like watching movies in theaters, not because I like being around people, but because there is a social mores that I cannot look at my phone while I'm watching this movie in this space. Even when there's only 3 other people in the theater, I won't do it. And so it forces me to pay attention more than I would if I was at home. There's so many videos recommending ways to extend your attention span. Choose your poison, whatever it is. Set yourself up for success and try. Also, be patient with yourself. Maybe I should have said this first. I think we often want a story or a message to be immediately clear and get frustrated when it's not, which pushes us to desire simpler ways to consume instead of sitting with the fact that we are confused and looking for ways to unravel that confusion. I will note that there is a benefit to an easily accessible story, especially for people trying to get back into reading in particular. But to quote Kaylee of Read Rant Reviews, sometimes people shouldn't get the point. It is okay to be challenged by a complex narrative and come out the other end completely confused. Let that push you to the next tip, which is to talk to other people about media. Join a book club or an AV club and jump into conversations about narratives that confuse you. It is okay to be confounded. Media was meant to spark conversations, and those conversations can circle around comprehension. I have this longer train of thought that I think the over-reliance on AI comes from a fear of being wrong, but learning is a process that requires you to stumble. Embrace the fact that you need to ask clarifying questions and find the spaces to do that. If you can't find other people to talk to, I'd encourage you to read or watch reviews of some of the media you are ingesting, not to find an opinion to subsume as your own, but to get examples of how people are analyzing the same things that you are consuming. Also, reviews can help with comprehension in a very SparkNotes adjacent type of way. A lot of people who give reviews tend to summarize the piece beforehand, which can help perhaps with tracking if you were keeping along with the story as it was progressing. You can also practice your media literacy skills on the reviews that you're watching, questioning the authorship or perhaps the techniques used in the review, as well as its impact on you, as opposed to simply consuming a review as an objective truth. If you're feeling really freaky, you could give yourself some homework and try a reading comprehension practice task like writing your own summary or using a graphic organizer to track the structure of a story. Whatever you choose to do, just make sure you exercise your brain, beloved. It's the only one you've got. If you made it to the end, thank you for making it to the end. If you're watching early on Patreon, thank you for your continued support. How are your media consumption habits? Colormind and I got into a conversation about performative masculinity that kind of swerved towards breaking down the way well-meaning jokes get fast-tracked to being bastardized and regurgitated punchlines, which is to say, I had a lot of thoughts about media literacy and struggled to focus, but I hope this was both helpful and transferable. It feels really short, and maybe it's because I'm not whinging, I'm just delivering information and hopefully some things that you can take forward with you. I also asked this over on Patreon, but if you're interested in practicing media analysis via breaking down the visual elements that create meaning in a frame of media, let me know. It might live over on Patreon, but it could be a cool thing to do between essays, kind of what Hannah Beachler was asking with that Sinners frame of like, what here is sparking your brain, not necessarily sparking joy, but just making you think. I don't know. I also have been meaning to make a more cohesive list of all the film studies jargon that I've been collecting and kind of just toss around. And that media analysis practice is somewhere where a lot of that jargon could live. So, if you're interested in that as well, let me know. Or if you're interested in something totally different, let me know that too. I'm always interested to hear your thoughts. For now, though, this is all for me. So until next time, stay safe. I'll catch you in the next echo chamber.